I'm fantasy author Elle Penelope, and welcome to My Imaginary Friends, a look behind the scenes of an author mapping the worlds in my head and making them a reality. Hello friends, today is Friday, October 11th, 2019, and this is episode 36 of My Imaginary Friends. I'm Leslie. 11 years ago today, I got married. So this week's best thing is my anniversary, which is always fun. We've been together for 14 years and married for 11. And it's been great. We are happily child-free, which is something that I need to start saying more when people ask if we have kids. Joanna Penn from the Creative Penn podcast, whenever she says she's happily child-free, she has this like gleeful little giggle, like, ha, I'm happily child-free. And I feel like if she says it like in person, people might look at her a little strange. I mean, people look at you strange anyway if you say that. Like I have said it. And you get varying reactions. But it does tend to stop the sort of weird, like we were just at a wedding last weekend and my husband was talking to the woman next to him at the table. And so I wasn't exactly in the conversation, but I heard it. And, she asked if we had kids and he was like, no. And she was like, oh, well, not yet. You still have time. And I've had that happen to me too. And so if you replied to the question with, oh no, we're happily child free, then you don't have to get into that weird not yet territory when people think, because, I do look younger than I am. So I think people assume I have more time than I actually do, even if I did still have my uterus. So yeah, you get into this sort of thing where they assume that everybody wants children and everybody doesn't. And even if everybody did, everybody can't. So like, I would just encourage you, if you're going to ask someone, I think it's perfectly fine. It's normal in the course of a conversation with someone that you don't know to inquire as to whether they have children. But don't assume that if they don't, that not yet is an appropriate response. I think that if they say no, then ask, oh, do you have pets? And then we can regale you about stories of our dogs and cat and show you pictures of my pit bulls. And if someone doesn't have kids and no pets, then I'm not judging them. Because honestly, I probably wouldn't have pets if it wasn't for my husband. I might have at some point gotten a cat, but I'm not a dog person. And even though I have two lovely pit bulls, I'm still not a dog person. I like my dogs and no one else's in general. And they're here right now. So if you hear any strange noises, chalk it up to them. But yeah, so 11 years, it's been fabulous. And I'm very happy about my anniversary. We're going to dinner tonight. We don't do a whole lot. Usually we go on a trip. And this October is so busy that we're pushed our trip back to November. So one of the reasons why I got married in October was fall is my husband's favorite season. He loves the leaves changing, and he loves autumn. And it was very convenient to get married in autumn because you miss the summer rush and all of that stuff. And also October was not only my father's birthday, he also died in October. And so it can be a difficult month. And so I thought I would try to reclaim that month with something happy by having our wedding and then our subsequent anniversaries in October. And I'm not a super sentimental person. It is a little difficult on his birthday. And I don't always, not necessarily the day he died, because that's not like a memorial point, but our whole lives, his birthday was October 1st. And this year I had a book launch on October 1st, which was also very nice to kind of reclaim that day. So this year our anniversary trip is going to be in November, and we're still getting the details down. Kind of last minute, obviously. But we usually go someplace and look at the leaves, to go like leaf watching. Like last year we went to New Hampshire. We've been to Maine and North Carolina. So yeah, we're going somewhere. It is his responsibility to deal with this trip. Like I usually plan all the trips, and the anniversary trip though, I leave it to him to do. So we'll see what's happening with that and where we end up. Writing news. It's been going well. It's been going really well. I've been getting up early. I met with a friend once again this week on Google Hangouts to write at 7 or so in the morning, and a lot of times I'll get up a little earlier to sit down and do it. So that's been going really nicely. It's slower than I want, but I'm happy with the way the words are going. I'm going to send it to the first couple of chapters to my critique partner, shout out to Denny, and see what she has to say just to get a sanity check. I think they're pretty clean, and I think that there'll be minimal going back to weave in more things and add more things, but I'm so close to it that everything makes sense to me. And it is difficult because I don't know that I have anybody who has read all of the everything so far. So even Denny has read pieces of this and that. The schedule for the previous manuscripts has been such that I haven't had a full beta read on them. And so you get to the end of the series and it's like, well, who's read the rest of them? So I have sent out manuscripts to people. Hopefully they'll have time to read at least book 2 and 3. That becomes a problem at this stage when you've had aggressive deadlines and sort of a shortened schedule. And so being able to get feedback from people who have read everything and then can quickly read what you give them, it's asking a lot of your critique partners. And so some things don't require you to know anything else. Like if I'm sending out some chapters, it's like, just tell me what you can. I know you might not have read the previous book. Since it is book 4, I do recap a little bit because just like for memory reasons, like I don't remember anything. So when I come to the next book in a series, if I'm not binging them all in the same week, then I do appreciate some reminders like, oh yeah, who was that? And what did they do? Because chances are I'm not going to have time to reread an entire book before a book 3 or a book 4 comes out. So, I have a lot of material to get through in this book. I do try to recap a little bit, but it's not going to be a lot. All of that to say, hopefully my critique partners will be able to still give good feedback without having at the top of their mind everything that has happened before. It's at the top of my mind. And at some point, I am going to have to reread book 2 and 3. I was hoping that when I get the edits for book 3, that will require me to reread it. So I didn't want to reread it before then. But we'll just have to see how the schedule works out. In other writing news, so I had a whole bunch of things I did this week that I was going to run down, just to give a sense of what a week looks like with all the writing tasks. So not just the writing of the book that I'm working on. I had to book the copy editor for the second novella, which I'm going to release next February. I had to check in with my cover illustrator for said novella, so see the progress on the cover. I had to complete a synopsis, a short version of the synopsis for book 4. I thought she asked for 2 pages. She asked for 2 paragraphs. So I have this long, 14-page version of the synopsis for book 4. I made a 2-page version, which I don't think makes any sense because I had to cut out half the characters to get it to 2 pages. And then a blurb type. So the sales copy for the in-house launch. And I had to revise an article that I did for Tor.com, which should be coming out sometime soon. I recorded a podcast interview on a new podcast called You're Doing Great with Laura Van Holt. So I will let you guys know when that drops. And that was a lot of fun because Laura's a lot of fun. Shout out to Laura. I will link to her new podcast in the show notes so you can check it out. It's pep talks and inspiration to let you know that you're doing great, which is always good to have a reminder of. So yeah, I think I caught everything. There's a bunch of other emails. I caught a weird issue on my Amazon page that I had to alert St. Martin's about. So hopefully they can fix that on the series page. And just keeping track of things, a lot of balls in the air. So while I'm writing this, I actually have to do a schedule for the revision of the novella so that I can turn it in and get it published on, figure out the dates that need to happen for me to get it edited and then published when I want to. And I had looked up and I was like, oh, if I'm going to put this book out in a few months, I really need to get my copy editor because she is busy and I have to get her several months in advance. So I now have a due date of mid-December for novella number 2. Now this novella is something that I drafted. I want to say I drafted it in 2016. It was years ago, and I haven't looked at it since. So I am going to go through that detailed revision plan, and I believe I'm starting that either next week or the week after, so that I can look at what I have, which is just a fast draft, and then figure out how I'm going to revise it efficiently so that I can do it at the same time that I'm revising book 4. So as soon as I get that schedule, I know whatever I have to do for book 3 is going to pop up at that same time. Now, I've worked on 2 books at the same time before. I don't have the ability to work on 3. I barely have the ability to work on 2 at this point. But I feel like since book 4 is flowing pretty well, and it's just a matter of getting in and doing the work and taking the time. The second novella is going to probably require a little bit more because I know the end is a mess. But having written book 3, which, the novella leads into book 3, and working on book 4, and knowing these characters really well. When I first drafted it, I didn't know the characters as well, but since that was the first time they had really appeared as POV characters. So now for most of them, well, there's only 2 POV characters in the novella, but you see other characters that have since had other POVs in other books. I just feel like I'll have a better handle on it, and that's really nice. So crossing fingers that it will all go very smoothly and not give me any kind of weird existential problems and angst. Other stuff going on with this revision. So for the most part, it's rewriting and cleaning and polishing. But there are since it was a fast draft, there are a lot of holes that I have to fill. Like there are characters that I had to name, like minor characters that show up on the page, but that have to be fully realized people. And in the fast draft, they're not. They're just assistant. They're like literally Mr. Last Name appeared. I didn't want to deal with figuring out a last name, so I could have called him Mr. Smith, or something generic, but that didn't occur to me, so I called him Mr. Last Name. And had to give him a real name. And I keep a list of, names for the various countries and cultures in my story Bible. So really it's a matter of picking a name, or if I don't like any of them, coming up with a new one. But usually I can pick a name from the list that I haven't used. I also have a list of names that I have used, and then I kind of look and see, well, how many names in the series, start with the same letter. I don't want to do too many with the same letter because it becomes difficult. Like I already have a couple, like I have a Vanessa and a Vartan, and then they have a conversation together. And I would prefer not to, but that's the way it came out. So whenever I don't want to add another V name to someone who might interact with those people and then confuse everybody and confuse myself. So pick some names, and then figure out the general personality of the secondary character. I don't really write it down. It's just like, okay, what kind of energy is this person bringing to the scene? What's going to cause conflict? Envisioning a sort of life for them, just the brush strokes so that they seem like a person. And maybe, I always think of everybody as a possibility for a spinoff. Like, could this person have their own short story or their own novella at some point, whether or not I ever plan to write it? That's kind of how I approach the secondary characters. So I need to know at least where they came from, their personality, what might be going on with them before I can put them on the page. If they're going to have any sort of speaking role, if they're going to be, even in a couple of scenes, I just have to know a little more about them then. This is the assistant. He tells her some stuff and then he leaves. That's the nature of it in the fast draft. So that's, takes a little bit of time. I had to spend some time, before I got into the scene, figuring out the name, kind of what they look like, all that stuff. And then writing the scene, rewriting it. And then in the next pass, refining that a little bit, so that whether the next pass happens that day or the next day, just tweaking it. And because the first, and I have some notes about that. Like I have a couple of words in the fast draft that give me the idea that I was going for, like, oh, this is a nervous character. So I might have written that he walks in and, looking around nervously. I'll just spell it out in the fast draft and then try to refine that so that I'm not telling you everything. I'm showing you how he walks and how his breathing is and the thoughts that the POV character has about this character. So those are some things that make the process take a little longer, filling in all those gaps and all those holes while still making sure everything is connecting and pushing forward. But like I said, it's been going well, and I'm happy with what I have so far. So just have to keep pushing through. An article that I saw that came out this week on the KM Weiland blog helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com, was about writing life-changing fiction. And I'm going to link to it because I thought it was really a good concept, like definitely something that I think about. They say don't only become a writer if you have to, because it's so hard. Like, it's not easy. And, the friend that I've been writing with in the mornings, so this is her first novel. She's published some short stories and is working on this novel that she's been working on for years. And, is having trouble with the momentum and just struggling through it. And it's like, you see people going through this, and I can only tell her how I got over the hump, because I've been there. Years ago, I struggled with a novel for years and never finished it. And trying to remember what exactly flipped the switch into, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do whatever it takes to do this. I'm going to stop watching television, cut out all my shows, wake up early, stay up late, whatever you have to do to finish it while still working a full-time job. Because that is one of the issues that she's having, just time and energy around her job. And it's something that I think that, almost all of us go through. And for each person, how they get through it is going to be different. Because it has to be self-motivated. I can tell her all of the tips and tricks and, the ways that I hack my schedule and my life to try to get this done. But at the end of the day, you have to have that drive inside of you to do it. And you have to need to do it because finishing the first novel is just the first step, and I talked to her about my publishing journey. She has other friends who are published and talk to her. And so, hopefully when she finished it, she'll walk in eyes open, knowing at least our experiences and ups and downs that we've had. But like, you have to get over that first hurdle and be completely self-motivated if you're going to continue to have any momentum in the publishing industry, whether you're self-publishing or traditionally publishing, because they're both can be hard and soul-sucking. And so this article about writing life-changing fiction is just one more of those things where it's like, what is your motivator? What is getting you up out of bed early? What's making you write at your lunch break or whatever? And then that is the thing that's going to push you forward through querying and rejections and then successes and then rejections and all the other stuff. There was another, an episode, I think the latest episode of The Writer's Well, where they talk about, is it worth it? That was kind of, they asked each other these questions, and what I got out of it was that just hearing both of the hosts of that podcast talk about thinking about, is this even worth it? Like, when you're not making the money that you want to make, when you're taking a leap of faith, leaving a job and going all in, and constantly having to check in with yourself, like, is this worth it? Can I stop? Can I do something else? Can I go back to a day job for those people who, went all in? And that question doesn't really go away. Like, as much as I love this, there are times when you're like, is it worth it? Like, I look up and I'm like, I've been in this room for 12 hours. I'm like, why am I doing this? And so going back to like writing life-changing fiction, I can only do this because I believe in the stories that I'm telling. And I feel like I'm trying to say something that I have to say, like whether or not the book sells, whether or not the next book is published, that's just part of it. And it's not going to ever change, There's a tweet thread by Delilah Dawson that I saw linked to somewhere else also. And she goes, the longer I'm in the industry, the more I see that longevity isn't based on skill or ideas. It's about how many punches you can take and keep standing up. A book didn't sell, get up and write another. Bad review, keep writing. Advance is small, suck it up. No PR, keep writing. And yeah, that's kind of the theme of this week. Like, constantly check in with whatever stage you're in. If you're working on that first novel and, it's not going well and you're just frustrated, whatever it is that gets you through onto the other side is the same thing you're going to need at every step of the journey. And it's important to remember, no matter where you are, whether you're a New York Times bestseller or whether you're planning to win your first NaNoWriMo next month, Another thing I wanted to mention was that Robin Lefevers is doing really cool stuff on her Instagram. Definitely check that out. She's having like master classes, and I think I've talked about this before, but she started a new one on pre-writing, and it's just really worth looking at. What she calls pre-writing is what I call plotting, but it amounts to the same thing. And she kind of does writing exercises where she looks into character motivations and wounds and backstory and all that stuff. And so I will link to that as well. I started this thing that I wanted to tell you about. I started a thing. So a lot of times I will like make a note of an article and be like, oh, I'm going to talk about that on the podcast. And then I won't, either I'm running out of time or I forget or whatever. And so I started a Tumblr for just those things, whether it's articles or quotes about writing, publishing, authoring, those kinds of things. And I hooked it up to MailerLite so that it sends out the RSS feed as a newsletter. So I'm calling it Footnotes. It's sort of like an addendum or a compendium to the podcast, with some of the notes will be stuff that's in the show notes, and some of the stuff will be just stuff I didn't have time for, or other stuff that didn't make it in. And so if you would like to get a weekly list of links and things, cool things to check out, it's going to be at lpen.co/footnotes. So I started like a link shortener website. I saw this, Kit Roca did this, gave me this idea to create a whole separate site that's just for my own links. So it's lpen.co, not com. So anyway, lpen.co/footnotes. It's also available on the regular podcast page. And so yeah, if that's something that sounds cool to you, it's all automated. So whenever it'll come out on Mondays, which is the same day that the podcast comes out. And yeah, check it out. So I think that's it for me for this week. I hope you have a wonderful week full of great things and full of like inner motivation. Keep that inner fire lit. I think that's really important, whether you're writing or, whatever else that you're doing, because it's going to keep you going. So as I tend to my inner fire, I hope you have a great week and happy reading. For episode show notes and to learn more about me and my books, go to lpenelope.com. Subscribe to My Imaginary Friends wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the video episodes on YouTube. And please leave a rating and review to help support the show.